All right, take a look at what we have going on at the corner. Wall and broad markets are off and running. These are highs of the day. We're about 140 points away from a record on the Dow, about less than 0.5% for the S&P 500, 0.5% or so for the NASDAQ. These are records that were reached last week. We're revisiting them today. Money that had been going into bonds not too long ago is now leaving bonds, going into equity. So the 10-year Treasury yield hitting a 3-week high in the process. We're going to go into some of the details, all this in just a second. Right now to AGF Chief U.S. Policy Strategist Greg Valliere and Baltic Head of Research Kathryn Rooney Vera on what the markets are seeing. Kathryn, I ended with you, so I'd like to begin with you and get your take about whether this jobs report that precipitated a lot of this is real enough to sort of put Democrats at pause on the impeachment thing, or at least make it seem like more of an uphill battle.
Well, I think there's no chance of that, Neil, right? I mean, impeachment is a full-speed train, and that's moving forward. The market has already discounted that in all-time record high equity markets. In other words, Neil, it's meaningless. So from a market's perspective,
meaningless in that the markets don't see the president getting impeached. I mean, in the House it might happen, but it's not going to happen.
Meaning the markets fully anticipate an impeachment by the House and an exoneration by the Senate. Everyone's expecting that. That's discounted. What isn't discounted is any tumult in the trade deal or any negative catalyst from Iowa, New Hampshire, and Super Tuesday ushering in one of the more far left-wing candidates. That, Neil, is not discounted.
You know, Greg, on the far left-wing candidates, so you can make the argument that better things look for that type of a candidate. I guess Elizabeth Warren comes to mind, maybe Bernie Sanders. The more Wall Street might relish that possibility, right? Because that would look better for President Trump. It's just me, you know. What do you think?
It all looks so good right now, Neil. Yeah, I think that's right. I think Elizabeth Warren would lose 40 states. Bernie might lose 43 states. So I don't know if I'm mixing my metaphors or not, but can you have Goldilocks on steroids? Are those two words compatible? Because I think you're at a situation now where, you know, phenomenal labor market, no inflation, low interest rates. I mean, it's pretty rare to see everything lined up as perfectly as it is right now.
Kathryn, I'll take the other point of that. I'll take the other side of that. I think the complacency in the markets and the greed index, if everyone wants to Google the greed index and see where we stand right now, is at levels that are so disconcerting to me, Neil, that what I'm actively recommending to my clients, and I agree the economy is doing great. I've held that for a year. There's no recession on the near-term horizon. Near-term meaning 12 to 18 months. No recession for sure, I agree. But what is not discounted is any incipient inflation engendering a response from the central banks to get off of negative interest rate policy or close to zero interest rate policy, which will induce a popping of the bubble that exists in risk assets induced by global central bank intervention.
That to happen, though, right?
Well, and one other thing I'll say, I think, Neil, that's important that I take a different view on is it's a lot of people say, hey, look, Elizabeth Warren gets the nod for the nominee. It's not a big deal. She's not going to be able to do half the stuff. And everyone said that about Obama and Trump. True. I'll push back on that, too. There's a lot that can happen with just 60 votes. There's a lot that can happen with executive power. There's a lot that can happen with regulation. So a lot of harm can be done to an economy and to markets that have seen 4 years of deregulation, less government, and tax
you
cuts.
raise a good point. Greg, real quickly on this same subject before we branch out to China, if you guys don't mind. Is it your sense that, you know, of all the Democratic candidates, they all are going to raise taxes to some degree, $3.5 trillion under the Joe Biden plan that will bring the top rate back up to close to 40%, tax capital gains at the regular income rate, raise the corporate rate from 21 to 28%. And he's the more conservative of those taxers. Right. So to Kathryn's point, that would be a worry for the stock market, that at the minimum, the most moderate of the bunch, can you say most moderate, is actually anything but.
You're singing my song because, I mean, Biden is $3.2 trillion over 10 years. He's the moderate. And you go out and look at some of the people further to the left, they have $20 trillion over 10 years. So no matter who won, there would be a risk. I agree. There would be a risk of significantly higher taxes.
All right, guys, if I could switch gears on China, this has been another sort of amber in the fire for more buying here. Larry Kudlow earlier on this network telling our Stuart Varney that he's optimistic on these China talks. Take a look.
I will say we're close. I will really rather quote the president, who himself, in London and now back in Washington the last couple days, has said virtually round-the-clock talks. The talks have been constructive. The talks have been productive. He's been saying this. He's been tweeting this. He hasn't seen the final deal yet, but he's been pretty optimistic about the movement of this thing.
You know, sometimes, Kathryn, when I hear this stuff, I think the administration is playing us like a fiddle. That is, everyone in the media, everyone, waiting in bated breath for some progress on China trade only days after the president was saying a deal wasn't imminent before the presidential election next year. So what do you make of this talk? So suddenly people are optimistic.
Doesn't it feel? Does anyone else feel like it's Groundhog Day? For me, it does,
yes,
because it's the same. It's the same play over and over and over. And I get these same questions from the media and from clients. Guys, this is a negotiation. This is a negotiation. A deal is going to get done because Trump needs it and because China needs it. That's just the fact of the matter. China has 30% of their GDP attached to trade, the majority of which comes from the United States. Trump needs a win for re-election. At a minimum,
but
phase
nothing's
one is
happened.
coming.
15 months of this and nothing's happened.
Yeah, something's going to happen, I think, before November. And the Chinese need it and Trump needs it. So
what do you think of that, Greg?
There's
something before the election.
Well, I go back to October 11th when they said they had an agreement in principle, but they didn't.
Right.
So what did Reagan used to say? Trust but verify. If they say in the next week or so that we have an agreement in principle, it means nothing. We got to look at the details.
Right.
Yeah, and but part of the commitment to buy more soybean and pork-related products, I've heard that one before, too.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Guys, I want to thank you both very, very much. Have a great weekend.